Hello, my name is Wilbert Banks, and I'm working with Rolando Kahina. Our peer expert presentation is over religion. In this presentation, we're going to look at the link between religion and our culture in this country and around the world. Furthermore, we're going to look at history, the history of religion, and how it influences education as it is. We'll look at legal cases that influence our current situation, and then after that, we're going to relate real, authentic administrative situations to religion and education. And we'll end with some questions. Religion and culture. Much of our culture is influenced by religion. The big question that we have to ask ourselves is, how does cultural proficiency look when evaluating religion and education? Teaching religion in Texas schools. Obviously, a big part of education is that we must teach history. That involves the history that's associated in US history, world geography, world history, but furthermore in science courses and also mathematics and other courses of philosophy and courses of related fields. All these courses have, to some degree, some influence and some history that's related to religion. Separation of church and state. Well, it turns out that the separation of church and state were actually not mentioned in the Constitution or any other documents that are created from our founding fathers for the purpose of governing the nation. In fact, the very first time that we actually see separation of church and state written was in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to Danbury Baptist Church in 1801. In this letter, Jefferson expressed a concern over the lack of their state constitution of explicit protection of religious liberty and against the government establishment of religion. Simply put, what Jefferson was concerned about is that he was letting the Danbury Baptist Church understand that the government was not going to take over their religious beliefs and the church can practice as they believe is their best way to practice. But then on top of that, what's important is that he also set up a standard in which the government is not going to endorse any particular religion.
While working on this project, I decided to interview one of our social studies teachers who currently teaches world geography, who has also in the past taught world history and US history. And my questions that I asked her was like, how do you approach the influence of religion when looking at history and like, how is it taught? Do you go in detail with like specific traditions that are inside each religion or different artifacts, or is it just kind of like really shallow? And her response was that they go in a pretty great detail with religion as far as like, how, what influences different religions and what they believe. She also made a statement to ensure that, as this information is taught, that is taught from a perspective that students that the religion is definitely not like downgraded, or it's also not upheld as like the religion. So her big emphasis is ensuring that every religion has like its importance in the curriculum and for the religions that they cover. um, for her in particular, when looking at world geography, she said world geography is broken up into two parts. But the big portion of it that deals with, as far that has a big section dealing with religion, is the cultural or the human geography. And that area focuses on how the culture is mended by the religion, and that geography kind of sets the religion sets like where people live at, because that's where they practice their belief sets and things of that sort. And that's a big portion of their curriculum, and it's like actually at the very beginning, and it's kind of tread throughout the rest of the curriculum. Furthermore, she mentioned the importance of it in U.S. history and world history, and the same thing there. It's just like when you get to different regions and and different impacts. The importance obviously of like how religion plays a big part in our society. She also mentioned the importance of what she called the big five religions, and that's Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and then she sometimes covers Sikhism, depending on where she's at inside the units. So that was also important as well. So we can't really get away from religious talk in education because it is important. It's important that we understand like how religion has shaped and molded our countries. And on top of that, if students are inquisitive and want to look deeper into certain religions that are taught inside school from that shallow sense, uh, I think the important thing is that being unbiased as far as like showing, different types of religions, and so in a way that's truthful, that history supports and that doctrine supports and things of that sort. So that's important.
So, what does that put us at with religion and education? Well, today, the most accepted approach to this is an attitude of religious pluralism. That's an attitude of policy regarding the diversity of religious belief systems coexisting in society. The idea that different religions can practice, not in a sense of saying that they have the same theology, but in the fact that they can exist within the same nation or within the same area and not have as much conflict as expected. The great thing about this country is that we have policies that allow for individuals to freely worship, um, and we don't endorse a specific religion. Some countries are based or founded on certain religions. As a result, that freedom does not take place. So we are in a great situation in which religious pluralism is already kind of like set inside the standards of what we can use. Data from today's religious groups. Christians make up the majority of most religious members in the world. Muslims, unaffiliated, Hindus, Buddhists, folk religions, and other religions, and then last but not least, Jews. With some of these religions increasing in numbers, it's expected that the number of Islam practicing individuals would increase dramatically within the next 30 years or so. Facts about religion. The United States is made up of a myriad of cultures, religions, and political beliefs. Most Americans call themselves Christians. Over 50% claim to be Protestant Christians. Eastern religions continue to grow in the United States, including Buddhism and Hinduism. Judaism and Islam are firmly rooted in America as well, even though that their numbers are smaller. Education, law, and religion. Well, in order to understand how the law works dealing with education, you must first look at the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment. These two amendments are probably the most hailed as far as using precedent inside cases and showing how conflicts in religion and education can take place. The First Amendment of the Bill of Rights of the Constitution states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of press, or the right of people to peacefully assemble, and to petition the government for redress and grievance. Two clauses are established in this amendment. The first clause is known as the Establishment Clause. The U.S. does not have any state-endorsed religion, nor does it write its laws based on any religious ethics. The Free Exercise Clause is also seen here, which states that you cannot be prohibited from being part of a certain religion, although it does not mean that you can't be in that religion. It doesn't mean that any practice is okay. Like, for instance, if you're inside of a religious sect that believe that human sacrifice is part of your rituals. Obviously, in this country, you will not be able to sacrifice people However, it's not illegal for you to believe that in your practicing. The 14th Amendment. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The big aspect here in the 14th Amendment is the aspect of deprivation of life, liberty, or property. And where does religion fall within that clause? So it's always used in the First Amendment is always used, and we'll see how these guys are seen inside jurisprudence throughout our history. The first case that's important here is West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. This case seemed like it would probably not have a big relationship with religion and education, because when you're really reading this law, I mean this case, it's a case over the Pledge of Allegiance, and in this particular situation, the the education board forced individuals to basically stand and they had to recite the pledge. Okay, the reciting portion obviously is the important part of it, and the issue that was addressed here was how much power does the school have in order to, force individuals to do it, or is this free exercise or things of that sort? And this case is not a religious case, but it's used for the precedents for other cases that deal with religion. Everson versus the Board of Education and Township of Ewing. New Jersey usage of tax money in supplying private religious schools with resources. In this particular case, the school district gave private schools money for resources that helped students. And it wasn't really directed towards religious acts. It was just simply a religious school performing the acts. And in this case, the school was actually okay because of the fact that it was proven that the private school was not using the money to promote its religion or promote itself. It was simply there to give students supplement. McCollum versus the Board of Education. The court stopped religious people from coming into schools to give instruction per district officials. In this case, what happened was is that administrators and school leaders, although not having the ability to directly lead students in religious affairs, what they decided to do was reach out to community leaders and people outside of the school and court those individuals so that they can come into the school and lead religious events. And this is not uphold itself obviously inside the courts. The court said obviously that the schools were wrong because of the fact that they were literally going out and seeking and finding a way to put the religion into education, violating the secular approach in education and law. Engel versus Vitale is a really big case. And this one was based off of voluntary prayer in public schools. It's a question that still pops up today. But in this case, the school basically had a time in the day in which they had a voluntary prayer time. And as a result, a student would lead a prayer. The prayer is generally going to be like some non religious or non denominational prayer. Okay. But the issue that took place there was that the school was still kind of putting this time into it itself. It wasn't directed by students. This wasn't a big concern about students. It was school and school leadership leading it. There's other cases that are present here on this next slide. I'm going to go to the most important one, which still influences how we view laws and rules in school districts and states based today. And that's the Lemon versus Kurtzman test. And this took place in 1971. The most important thing about this particular case is that the judicial branch basically made a test, a litmus test, to figure out if a law or a statute or a rule was in violation of the First Amendment right or the First Amendment Establishment Clause. And it was based off of three questions that they asked. The first question was this: is the purpose of the law or the standard secular? The second question was, does the law advance or inhibit religion? With this, it's really kind of difficult to to view this. Sometimes you'll say like, well, does it advance something? But the other part of it, does it inherently inhibit another religion from being able to be what they believe they should be? And then the last question is, does the act cause excessive entanglement? And what this means is that if one and two, okay, if those two answers, is it secular? And the answer is yes. And does the law advance or inhibit religion, any religion? And the answer is no, it doesn't. Then the last one can still kind of throw it off. Does the act cause excessive entanglement? And here's what the issue could be. So let's go take the last scenario. Let's say that you had a private school, and this private school was using public funds and public tax money because the school district donated it for Program X. And Program X was legit and it was not secular. But in order to evaluate if it was secular or if it was simply to advance a religion, the government had to hire individuals and had to use resources to research to ensure that that was the case. And the problem that takes place here is that that's the entanglement. The entanglement is now that's extra resources and extra monies. So as a result, you have an entanglement issue simply based off of that process. We'll see this a little bit later in the video that you'll watch.
Although there's a lot of controversy associated with how our schools approach education and religion, there are some benefits of allowing students to practice their faith in schools. Primarily, the fact that with many different religions being able to practice, that students and staff can become more aware of the cultures that are associated with different types of religions, and how those students and staff are able to interact with those individuals with different religions or beliefs in what they have. Secondly, the students are free to express themselves, and religion and culture go hand in hand. So when students are able to express themselves via their faith, that means they're able to express their culture a little bit better as well. Furthermore, it increases community involvement. When schools are able to open up their doors to various community groups, and not just focusing on one, but many community groups, it's able to kind of build a community around the school, and you get more aid and more support on campus. Furthermore, it creates a community standard, some things that, as far as the community working together, as and kind of lending a hand with the school. So those are some of the benefits of being able to, have students practice in school. That's, regarding the situation of like the legality of it.
So, another benefits are allowing students to practice their faith in schools. It excludes students. Students who are not part of religious or practice religions that is different from the majority of the school will feel excluded from many activities during the day. This exclusion would likely make that student a target for bullying and other prejudices that take place. Schools in favor for everyone. That means that public schools are funded by taxpayer money. If a child is not a part of a religious sect or does not agree with religion of the majority, then he or she may be highly opposed to paying taxes to fund these religious activities that could take place in schools. Contradicting education. Certain topics that are taught in school may cause conflict within the religious teachings of some religions. Subjects like science and history have contradictory lessons that may invoke confusion in other students. There's a fine line between teaching and preaching, and many parents feel extremely uncomfortable with their child being preached to about religious matters that they don't have any control over or say. Acceptance, tolerance, and understanding. So these three terms are important when really evaluating how we should view or what goes on with being able to approach this from an administrative standpoint. So acceptance is a fair, objective, and permissive attitude towards those whose opinions, practices, race, religion, nationality, etc., differ from one's own. Freedom from bigotry. Tolerance. Tolerance is a person's assent to the reality of the situation, recognizing the process or condition, often a negative or uncomfortable situation, without attempting to change it, protest, or exit. And then finally, understanding. It's a psychological process related to an abstract or physical object, such as a person, situation, or message, whereby one is able to think about it and use concepts to deal adequately with that object. So, what should schools do? Okay, and what can schools do? In order to look at that, you have to ask a couple of questions. Number one, can schools completely ignore religious beliefs? Is that the best approach? Another question that you can see is, should schools make an effective effort to endorse all religions and atheism? That could be another approach. And then finally, should schools stay away from discussion unless it becomes an issue on campus or the community? That meaning that, like, you know that there's going to be a big issue between a group of students from different religious backgrounds. And do you just see if this conflict takes place, so you don't proactively look at it? If it doesn't take place, you're okay. Or if it does, you just deal with it when it happens. All right, moving beyond tolerance to understanding. To understand each other in a way that we need to be less judgmental and accept that. Number one, our way may not be the only way. Number two, emotion often gets in the way of objectivity. And number three, no religious belief, ideology, or pressing need justifies the violation of another person's basic human rights. The quote on the side over here says that we may have different religions, different languages, different colored skin, but we all belong to one human race. It's a good quote. So, some things that we can do and things that we can't do based off of the laws that we saw and the court cases that we evaluated earlier. Number one, the things that are permissible by schools. Student private prayer. A student inside of the cafeteria decides that he's going to have a prayer before he eats lunch. That is permissible. Not permissible by the schools. Staff or outside members invited by school personnel leading a prayer at school. Permissible. Student religious clubs, such as Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Okay, organizations like this must be student-led. Okay, by most standards of most districts and the state, it requires that you have a sponsor that's an adult, that's a teacher generally, or someone that's associated with the district. That individual, however, cannot be the organizer of the group and the club. What is not permissible? Student-led prayer during an event, such as a game. We'll mention later inside this presentation, but I'm going to kind of pre-direct it now. It's a good time to talk about it. Is that Santa Fe High School? We know Santa Fe for being in the news recently for a different reason than religion, but they have had a case in which before football games, a student led a prayer, and it was generally, led in a case in which the students kind of voted on who's going to lead the prayer, in which students were selected a certain way. And that was a violation of that First Amendment situation. Religious works of historical and artistic significance are permissible by school. What is not permissible is the promotion of any religion over another, including the promotion of atheism over other religions. So what's important about a couple of things, and another case to kind of look at that has a big thing as far as like administrative thinking, some things that you can think about as a future administrator, is the Fleming versus Jefferson County School District. This happened in 2002 in the 10th Circuit. And what happened in there is that the situation was that students at Columbine High School, if you remember Columbine High School, they were known not for obviously just its case, but the shooting that took place. But students at Columbine High School was asked to create towels for a permanent art display to commemorate the shooting that took place there in the spring of 1999. Some students choose to put messages like God is love on their towels. The school refused to include these towels in the display, and the students sued the school. Now, here were the results of that. The Supreme Court ruled that if the school allowed these towels, the school will also have to allow towels with distasteful messages, such as God is hate, as part of this display. And since these towels would become a permanent part of the school retained the authority and banned the towels.
In October 2015, a Tennessee state legislator introduced a bill that would change religious studies teaching standards in Tennessee schools. Responding to some parents' concerns that their kids are being indoctrinated by Islamic teaching, the bill mandates that students cannot be taught religious studies classes before grade 10 in order to protect young children from feeling conflicted with what they are taught at home versus what they learn at school. The bill also mandates that the State Board of Education will ensure that no religion being taught in any history or geography class will ever amount to any sort of indoctrination. But what amounts to indoctrination? Does teaching the theology of Islam, Buddhism, or Hinduism really making Tennessee kids that conflicted? Now, some scholars have proposed mandatory religious studies classes for American public schools. But obviously, judging from this Tennessee bill, this is very controversial. So the question remains, are religious studies classes in public schools a good idea? And if not, what should we do about the growing religious illiteracy in our society? In a previous video, I talked about the growth of religion in the 21st century. Pew Research has found that religious groups are projected to grow as a share of the global population by 2050. Islam in particular is projected to experience the most growth. Now, a lot of this is based on other population growth and fertility factors. Some of the most secular countries on earth are already below population replacement levels, so it's not like everyone is suddenly converting to religion. There are a lot of factors at work here. But interestingly, another phenomenon is happening at the same time. Even though religious groups are growing worldwide, most people simply don't know anything about religion, or even their own religion. Now, I'm going to focus on the United States in this video just as an example. About 40% of Americans can't name the first book of the Bible. Only half of Americans know that the Quran is the holy book of Islam. Less than half know that the Dalai Lama is a Buddhist. And embarrassingly, 10% of Americans believe that Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. And maybe some of you remember this hilarious scene in 2006 when Stephen Colbert stumps Congressman Lynn Westmoreland when he couldn't name the 10 Commandments, which he was fighting so hard to keep standing in a courthouse in Georgia. Now, this is what we call religious illiteracy, which is when people lack knowledge, sensitivity, and understanding of other religions. Religious illiteracy can also be described as lacking the basic knowledge of the world's religious traditions, the diversity of expressions within a given tradition, and the profound role that religion plays in social, cultural, and political life. Now, whether you're religious or not, and whether you even like religion or not, you can't deny that it has been a huge cultural, artistic, philosophical, and political force throughout our species' history. And though you might deny it, religion continues to play a huge role in today's global society. So I think we would be a lot better off knowing a little bit more about this thing that pops up everywhere in our news cycle. Now, studying religion does not mean taking off your critical skeptic's hat. It doesn't mean being indoctrinated or saying all religion has truth to it. We all know that religion is deeply tied to violent episodes all throughout our species' history, and it should be critiqued, but it shouldn't be critiqued from a position of ignorance. So if this is the case, what are the benefits of boosting religious literacy? First of all, religious literacy just makes for a better functioning individual. It eliminates harmful stereotypes like Islamophobia, and it boosts your critical thinking skills. So when a politician says something about religion, you know they're being completely crazy or not. Now, this leads to benefit number 2, a better functioning society. Boosting religious literacy aids in social cohesion, how we get along with each other, and how we as a society work together to get over shared problems. And a third benefit, which really is just a bonus, is you get to see how other humans have wrestled with existential questions. Who are we? What can we know? And what is the meaning of life? Now, I don't have any easy answers to fix America's religious illiteracy problem. Religion for Breakfast is here to help, but some scholars have proposed some big changes to public policy. For example, Dr. Stephen Prothero, a professor of religion at Boston University, wrote a best-selling book where he urges at least 2 mandatory religious studies classes in all public schools, one on the Bible and one on world religions. Now, of course, these classes would be teaching religion in the Bible as social phenomena, and not as indoctrination or teaching the religion as true. Now, he argues that teaching the Bible as a text that is deeply entrenched in American politics and teaching world religions in general will make for a more balanced, tolerant, and effective public. But as we saw with the Tennessee state legislature, this is a very controversial idea. First of all, is it even constitutional? Now, public school teachers are technically government officials, and the First Amendment of the United States Constitution says the government cannot endorse any one religion. So the fear is, if public school teachers start teaching religion, they are somehow violating their students' constitutional rights. In fact, a 2010 Pew Research study found that 67% of Americans think it is illegal to read the Bible as a work of literature in public school classes. Now, a lot of this confusion stems from the Supreme Court's decision in 1963, Abington versus Shem, which outlawed public school teachers from reading the Bible devotionally to their students or leading prayer in public schools. Now, of course, this doesn't outlaw the academic study of religion, though. Justice Thomas Clark wrote, "It might be said that one's education is not complete without a study of comparative religion or the history of religion and its relationship to the advancement of civilization." So the Supreme Court is definitely on the side of religious studies classes, even though most of America thinks it's illegal. But the second controversy is religion is just too controversial. Wouldn't public school teachers be a lot more comfortable to avoid talking about Sunnis and Shias, or to avoid talking about evangelical politics in America today? Because it seems like you just can't talk about these topics without it becoming too personal, either for the teacher or the students involved. But are these controversies a good enough reason not to have religious studies classes? Now, I happen to think it's a great idea. Not only do I run a religious studies blog, but I find religion weirdly fascinating enough to devote my whole career to it. But many of you watching this are rational voting members of democratic societies worldwide. So you should decide for yourself. Is religious illiteracy a problem? And should we encourage more critical and comprehensive religious studies classes in public schools? If not, what alternate ways would you suggest boosting religious literacy? If I get any good answers, I'll share them in the next video. But until then, thanks for subscribing and thanks for watching.
All right, a couple of big points that was mentioned inside that video. If you were watching it, probably the biggest thing was the aspect of religious illiteracy and like some of the issues that take place in education, because we completely want to completely avoid like even talking about religion. So, although there's a separation between state and religion, the conflict that arises is when we avoid religion accurately in history courses, or we don't talk about how religion played an impact in many of the science advances or things of that sort. And those are important aspects for students to know and for kids to know. The question is, how do we as future administrators get to that point? So some pros list: it improves morale, it promotes religious freedom, it allows for well-rounded education, and it inspires harmony. Here's some cons: it distorts the notion that school is for everyone. It will cause contradiction in education, meaning that there are certain topics about religion in the schools that might cause conflict in the classroom. It will exclude some students, and it distorts separation of church and state. I would like to finish by reviewing and looking over a quite current situation that took place in Liberty High School in Frisco. In this particular situation, this story comes from NPR, National Public Radio, and Houston Public Media.org. And this PowerPoint will be also available, so you'll be able to click on it and find it if you like as well. I don't, just for time's sake, I'm not going to play it for you, but it is a very good article. But in this article, the school set up a prayer room because there was a need from, in particular, the Muslim students, in which they needed time to pray based off of their religious beliefs. The problem that took place is that if these students did not have this prayer room, if the students did not have a place to pray, then what they would do is that they would have to leave campus, and they'll leave campus for 2 to 3 hours on Fridays in order for them to pray. So therefore, they wouldn't be at school, so therefore they're not getting taught, which obviously puts those students at a disadvantage. So the administration's idea was to create a prayer room. And the prayer room obviously caught wind to some of the higher ups inside the school district, and it became a big issue. And the big issue was that there were groups of students, in this particular case, Muslim students, that were praying inside school and using school facilities for it. And the school's response was, well, this prayer room wasn't per se for Muslim students. Any group of religious groups can use the prayer room. However, it apparently appears as if it started because of the Muslim group. And it sounds like the biggest issue that took place was due to the fact that these students, over other religious groups, kind of started it. However, the access was still available to other groups. So, one of the post questions that you have here is that if you're in this situation, you have a group of students that have a particular religious belief that may interfere, their practice may interfere with your school day, with educational time. How would you approach that? What would you do based off the things that you learned from this lecture, and also what's important about all the courses that we've taken throughout this program? You know, what response would you have for those students, and how could you bring that up? A big problem also with this is that by the time the information got to the board member that complained about it, it was really brought about via hearsay. It wasn't because the administration told them about it. It's kind of got across through that, which means as a result, it causes even more conflict because it was more of not direct, heard it from the mouth of the individuals that started it, but hearing it through the rumor mill. Conclusion.
In conclusion, we want to highlight some very important things about religion. Number one, we understand that religion in education and how it even floats around education is a very hot topic. It's a topic that brings up emotion. It's a topic that allows, so for some individuals to become very frustrated. But it's also a topic that we cannot really veer away from. Throughout history, there have been many students that have wanted to express their religious freedoms in this country, and being able to do that legally, aside from the fact that our schools, our educational systems, are separate from that particular institution. So that's also very important. At the beginning of this presentation, we started with a story about a prayer room in Liberty High School, and how the school designated a prayer room for students. And if you listen to that particular story, the outcome was like the school was not in a violation of any type of federal or state statutes or state laws, and they did it with an effort to ensure that students remained on campus and remained safe, and also had a place where they could feel safe. But then on top of that, they didn't leave school, so they'll still be present so they can learn. So when we think about this, some big questions always pop up. The first thing that's important is the First Amendment, and where does the First Amendment lie for all of our students and for us as educators, and how school plays a role with this. And with this, you get two statutes that were, or two clauses that were established from the First Amendment. The first clause is the Establishment Clause, in which the U.S. Shows that it does not have any state-endorsed religion, or that it's not written in any law that a religion will be supported, or that laws are not based on religion. And then the second clause is known as the Free Exercise Clause, in which you cannot be prohibited from practicing or joining a certain religion. Obviously, there are some parts of that are important, such as like you can't practice anything inside those religions. In today's time, the biggest thing for us, as far as when you look at those two things, is the ideal of
religious pluralism. And that term was used earlier in the presentation. And it's an attitude or policy regarding the diversity of religious belief systems that can coexist together in society. Meaning that schools' responsibility is to educate students, but on top of that, provide safety for students and things of that sort as well. The school definitely cannot endorse one religion over another, and it cannot really prohibit an individual student, from, expressing his religious freedoms. So, like individuals that wear garments on their hair, on their head, or a student that wishes to pray on his own in solidarity somewhere. Schools really don't have a say with that aspect of it. But the question is, how can we allow that culture to continue and allow that student to still have that culture while still promoting, obviously, the culture of the school and the educational learning? And that's the thing that we always face, the things of trying to be able to balance these things, and also on top of that, not show a favor for one religion to another religion. So when it's all said and done, our real goal, our real aspect is, an aspect of unity, an aspect of like freedom with limits, an aspect of, being able to allow students to be expressive, but then on top of that, to uphold the standards and, the ability of the school to do its job, which is to teach students and for students to learn. So aside from the stats, aside from all the data and jargon and things of that sort, I think that the main premises, the bottom line that you kind of get from how religious, freedoms work, and on top of that, where the state lies at, where education lies at, is the final aspect of religious pluralism, of being able to allow students to practice. But then on top of that, all right, references. Well, guys, I thank you for your time. I know this presentation is a little longer than probably expected. There's a lot of information, a lot of meat is inside of it. We have some follow-up questions that you have with this presentation, so be sure to look over those and answer those appropriately. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.